Welcome back, guys. We're breaking down UFC Fight Night, Santos versus Ankalaev, and we got some pretty exciting fights on this card. Quite a few bangers, actually, but from a gambling perspective, this is a pretty dicey card because we have quite a few unproven fighters on here, some pretty low-level guys, who are just coming off the regionals, some unreliable fighters as well. So, we'll try and pick our spots here, but overall, this card should still be pretty fun. However, I'm probably going to tread a little lightly in terms of the betting here because, we're coming off of a pretty solid night. Would hate to lose it all back on such a shaky card like this. But diving right into the recap of last week's event, UFC 272, coming off of a pretty solid winning event, was able to profit 13.28 units on the night. And I do believe that's either going to be the biggest or second biggest winning night that I've had. So pretty solid night all around. Not looking to keep it rolling, but let's dive right into the breakdown here. So kicking off the card, we had Dustin Jacoby, Michael Oleksiejczuk. I did end up betting on the Jacoby side, took him to win by decision as well. It was a bit of a closer fight than I had expected, but in case you guys didn't notice, Jacoby was not throwing any leg kicks in there, which I did feel was going to be a bit of a factor. But apparently, he had an injury and wasn't able to really throw those kicks. Regardless, he still did work with his hands, mixing some of the wrestling and grappling as well. And won a pretty close decision here. Was able to cash on the decision prop and was also able to cash on that leg of the parlay. Moving along, Devontae Smith, Ludovic Klein did not end up having any action on this fight. Just wasn't really sure what to expect from either guys here. Klein coming in short notice. Smith with, pretty suspect cardio and chin. Klein, I believe, was able to eke out a decision. Wasn't too surprised overall, but yeah, didn't really have any action regardless. Tim Elliott to Gillian Bekov. I did take the over 2.5. Just did not think either guy had really good finishing upside, especially Bekov, who's more of just like a lay and pray artist, and then Elliott, who hasn't really gotten a finish in quite a while. Both guys also pretty solid defensively, so didn't really see a finish materializing, and minus 150 for the over 2.5 was, I think, a pretty solid line there. Somewhat upset I didn't bet Elliott because I did feel he was the value side. However, I can't be too upset because I did feel that Tagir did enough to win that fight. I felt like he could have won, 29-28 in that spot. But we move along. Brian Kelleher, Umar Nurmagomedov had Nurmagomedov parlayed up in my biggest parlay of the night. He cashed pretty easily. Kelleher just was not able to offer much. Was able to eventually find the finish, and we move along. Marina Moroz, Maria Agapova ended up parlaying Agapova for a small amount. Had her parlayed up with Kevin Holland. I think I had Holland to anchor a couple of parlays because I did feel pretty confident about him. But I expected the fight to play out a little more on the feet. Did not expect Moroz to be that aggressive with the wrestling and the grappling, but I guess she knew what the weaknesses of Agapova were and decided just to exploit them. So not a great bet there, but it was just a small parlay I had her in. And then Nikolai Negumereanu, Cannetti, and Nchukwi. Yeah, I had some action on Cannetti, and it's kind of frustrating because I did kind of see it playing out the way it did. Cannetti landing some of the better shots, but the optics just were not great. Him, getting back down, him, shelling up in most of those fights and just not showing really much aggression. I did score it for Cannetti, but again, you can't be too upset about it. The guy just did not show great fight optics on top of the fact that, he got point deduction. So not much else to say there. Just kind of frustrating because it did kind of play out the way I expected it to. And, I guess if you're talking about value, Negumereanu, definitely the value side there. But moving along, Marina Rodriguez, Yan Xiaonan. Not too upset with how it played out. I ended up taking the shot on Xiaonan there, and then also took a small shot on her to win by split decision, because I did feel this fight was going to go to a split decision. It was a very close fight. I think I did score it for Marina in that fight, but that second round was very close. I'm not sure if Yan did enough with the wrestling for her to win that round, but Rodriguez just a little sharper in there, but Yan Xiaonan did start pretty strong early, was able to steal around, and potentially could have stolen that second round, right? And honestly, not too upset there. It was, I think, a solid value bet. Moving along, Jalen Turner, Jamie Mularkey had a decent-sized bet on Turner. That ended up cashing. Felt pretty good about it. Turner was just, I think, the much heavier hitter in there. He was able to land some pretty heavy shots on Mularkey and, kind of played out the way I expected it to. Mularkey definitely, showed, a lot of heart in there, but just was not enough. Turner just the much more athletic guy, the much heavier hitter in there, and was eventually able to get him out of there in that second round. Moving along, Sergey Spivak, Greg Hardy. Yeah, I ended up having a small half-unit shot on Hardy. Took him to win by knockout, also by, first-round knockout as well. So, I thought the takedown defense of Hardy would hold up a little better, and I thought it would, too, because from what I saw on the tape, he did seem to have decent takedown defense along the cage and out in the open, but, we didn't really see him defend too many trips like the one that Spivak hit him with, so that kind of caught me off guard a little bit, and once Spivak was able to take Hardy down, Hardy just does not have the bottom game or the cardio to really, work himself back up, so... Spivak eventually was able to kind of flurry him, and Hardy just kind of shelled up in there. He doesn't really know what to do off his back still, so pretty bad look, but, did not go too heavy on this fight. Kevin Holland, Alex Oliveira took Holland to win inside the distance, near evens. I thought it was pretty good value. Also took a small shot on the submission line for Holland. Also had Holland parlayed as well. I thought the submission potentially could have been live. Oliveira is someone who, if you're able to hurt him, he will kind of just dive into a guillotine. It's happened twice already, I believe, once against Rachmanov and also against Randy Brown. And with someone like Holland, who does have a black belt in jiu-jitsu under Travis Lutter, pretty, well-versed submission guy himself, can crack on the feet. Potentially was live for the submission, and at like plus 850, I thought there was a ton of value there, but ultimately just took him inside the distance as well, because I did feel that the knockout was the likelier outcome. Obviously, that cashed in that second round, but that first round was looking pretty dicey. Looked like the speed of Oliveira might have been an issue for Holland early, but he was eventually able to get the timing down and was able to line up a pretty nice shot against Oliveira up in that second round and eventually get the finish. Moving along, Edson Barboza, Bryce Mitchell. Had a 3-unit shot on Mitchell here. I just thought the wrestling would get it done here. Barboza has struggled against wrestlers historically. Obviously, I didn't think that, Mitchell's quite at the level of guys, like Khabib and Lee, obviously. But I did think that stylistically he would pose some troubles for Barboza. And, once he was able to get Barboza down, Barboza just was not able to do much to get back up. Mitchell just absolutely smothering him on top. Made pretty easy work of him, honestly, and that cashed pretty easily. Moving along, RDA versus Renato Moicano. Not a fight I looked in too deeply. Did end up taking a small shot on RDA to win in round 4 and round 5. Also took the over on this fight, over 1.5. Had it parlayed with the under on the Spivak Hardy fight. In hindsight, the over on this fight probably not the smartest play, because Moicano coming in short notice, there was a very real possibility we see him just go super aggressively early, try and get RDA out of there, and if not, just gas out and possibly get finished, under that 1.5. So, probably not that smart of a play considering how juiced it was. So kind of glad that it worked out that it did. But, Moicano showing a lot of heart in that fight, probably a little too much. Ended up taking a lot more damage than he probably should have. Like, nobody would have blamed him if they had stopped the fight, after that third round. Very commendable performance on his part. It looked like he was coming back into it a little bit late in the fight, but I don't usually, agree with the commentary, but I do feel that RDA kind of took his foot off the pedal a little bit at the end there. Obviously he was returning a few shots, but I don't think he was really pouring it on like he could have against Moicano there, doing him a little bit of a solid. But moving along, Colby Covington, Jorge Masvidal. So Covington rounded off the big parlay there with Umar. Also took Colby to win by decision. Colby's just not really a finisher in there, man. The guy's got fantastic cardio and output, but the guy's just not a very big hitter or a very big submission artist either. So was able to kind of grind out Masvidal like I expected him to. Masvidal obviously had his moments, but the conditioning of Covington was able to pull through. The cardio was able to pull through, and the wrestling was able to come through as well. And that cashed relatively sweat-free. Obviously, he had that moment in that third round where I think he was wobbled a little bit, but recovered pretty damn well. And, Masvidal was just way too gassed to really capitalize either. So pretty good performance on Covington's part, and overall a really good winning night for me. Looking to keep it rolling for this card. We have 14 fights, so a pretty big fight night card overall. Looking to keep the train rolling on a pretty dicey card overall. But, without further ado, let's get right into it. And moving along, we have Azamat Murzakanov versus Tafon Nchukwi. And Murzakanov the minus 130 favorite. Comeback on Nchukwi is plus 110, and should be a pretty interesting matchup here. Azamat, someone who is very explosive in there early. He's definitely got some power in terms of the striking. He does seem to move pretty well early for someone his size and stature. He does like to bounce in and out of the pocket. Although I do have to say, the movement tends to kind of slow down a bit, after that 3-4 minute mark. He's shown pretty good power, but the volume can be a bit low. The guy's looking for the right shot in there. He's kind of feinting a lot as well, bouncing in and out of the pocket. Overall, volume not super high, but he does seem to have fight-ending power in there. And on top of that, the guy looks like he can wrestle a little bit. His top control seems pretty solid. He's pretty heavy on top. He does seem to have decent jiu-jitsu as well, generally looking to advance position and look to just lay the ground and pound and potentially find the submission if it presents itself. He's not really a big submission guy from what I have seen, though. Generally he's just looking to pound his opponents out. The potential concerns that I do have on the Murzakanov side is the cardio. I don't think he's got terrible cardio. He has gone to a decision once, but don't get fooled by that. Actually, it was actually a 2-round fight, but he did show decent wrestling and cardio in that fight. So I don't think it's bad, but he is someone who will slow down as the fight progresses. And second of all, he is getting a little up there in age, and he's not exactly the most experienced fighter for someone his age, right? He's only got 10 professional fights, and he's not really all that active either. And he's going to be going up against another powerhouse striker in Nchukwi. I actually consider Nchukwi more of a volume striker than more of a power striker, actually. The guy's got really good output and volume in there. He has shown that he could go, 3 good rounds, in terms of the striking output. He does a decent job of putting combinations together as well. I like that he goes to the body. And Nchukwi's also shown that he's pretty strong in the clinch as well. He's got some nice knees and elbows there. And again, the guy's shown 3-round cardio as well. So overall, I do think offensively he's a pretty solid fighter. But the issues that I do have with him is he's a bit plotty in there. And, I do think he's a bit on the slower end also. Also, I think his bottom game is a bit weak at this moment. His takedown defense is okay, but, we did see Jung Young Park take him down late in the 3rd round and was pretty much able to just control him for the remainder of the round. And, it's kind of understandable. Nchukwi's still pretty early in his career. The guy's only had 6 or 7 pro fights, and, he's still very young in there. So, I do expect him to be making some improvements, but from what I have seen so far, he does seem to struggle a bit if you are able to get him on his back. But taking a look at this matchup, it should be, I think, a pretty close competitive fight. Striking-wise, I do think that Murzakanov's got a bit of knockout upside. He's shown a lot of power on the regionals. That said, though, they're against pretty low-level guys in there. Nchukwi, I think, does have a bit of potential and does seem to be pretty durable, so I don't know if Murzakanov is going to be able to knock him out cold. If it's a 15-minute striking affair, I kind of do favor the cardio and the output of Tafon a little bit more. I think that if it's a 100% striking affair, I think the cardio and the output and pace of Nchukwi is going to take over come the 2nd and 3rd round. But, I do expect Murzakanov to have some, pretty big moments potentially on the feet. But I don't know if it's going to be able to be enough to win him to win the scorecards, essentially, unless he's able to knock him down. But if he's able to do that, then I think he could potentially swarm Nchukwi to get the finish. But prolonged striking affair, I do favor Nchukwi, but I do think that Murzakanov's got a bit of wrestling upside as well. He has shown that, he can hit takedowns and get a bit of control time. And I do think that that's something he could do against Nchukwi. Again, Nchukwi doesn't have the best bottom game, and Murzakanov has shown that, he can mix in the wrestling. So official pick for me is going to be Murzakanov. I think he's got a few paths to victory here. I think he's got the knockout upside early, and then, if it does get extended, he could potentially hit some takedowns to seal rounds, because I do think that, the striking is pretty competitive. I do favor the volume of Nchukwi, but, if Murzakanov is able to mix in some opportune takedowns, he could steal rounds that way. But betting-wise, I don't really know if I want to really get invested into this fight. I don't see a ton of value on either side here. I think that, both are pretty untested still. Murzakanov has fought just lower-level guys in there, and he's blown them out of the water most of the time. And same with Nchukwi to an extent. He's got a few decision wins as well, but they're against guys like Mike Rodriguez, and Jamie Pickett, who, are really just not that good of fighters, and he was able to kind of just beat him up for 3 rounds. And at the end of the day, I do think they're pretty evenly matched, so I don't see a ton of value on either side here. But, if you had to force me to pick a side here, I got to go with Murzakanov. He's shown a little more well-roundedness in his game, and he does seem to have a bit of power as well. So, give me Murzakanov, probably by decision. And in the next fight, we have Kris Moutinho versus Guido Cannetti. And Moutinho's the minus 140 favorite. Comeback on Cannetti is plus 120. And we're getting the return of Moutinho here. His second fight in the octagon after his short notice debut against O'Malley. And I feel like he's been a bit of a fan favorite since then, coming in short notice, showing the amount of heart that he did. And I'll be honest, it was amusing for the first 2.5 minutes or so, just watching him march down O'Malley like that. But, afterwards, it did get a little sad, because it didn't look like he really had much left. It was a very clear skill difference between the two. O'Malley was more or less just piecing him up. And it definitely felt like the fight might have gone a bit longer than it should have. Moutinho definitely showed that he was a dog in there. And by all accounts, he does seem like a pretty good guy. So I'll try and be as nice as I can with this breakdown. But I'll have to be honest, I rewatched a bit more tape on him and was reminded why I went so hard on O'Malley that day. Moutinho just did not really look good at all on tape. The striking is really not great. He's shown that maybe he could kick a little bit, do a bit of work in the clinch, maybe work the grappling a bit, but this was against all pretty low-level guys, and even in his wins, they really did not look all that impressive, combined with the fact that, all 5 of his losses are via finish, and it just does not really paint a pretty picture here. Fortunately, it looks like the UFC is trying to give him a bit of a softball matchup here, I guess almost as a favor for coming in short notice. So they're giving him Guido Cannetti, a 42-year-old Guido Cannetti, who quite frankly has not looked all that good either. And I'm a little surprised Cannetti's still in the UFC with how infrequently he fights and how often he loses. So, just taking a look at Guido Cannetti, the guy's, super old. He's coming off of a semi-competent fight against Mano Martinez. Martinez, I think, did win that fight, but, Cannetti didn't look completely terrible. But, I will say that I'm kind of off the Martinez train. The guy just has not really looked good in extended fights, but we're talking about Cannetti here, and, Cannetti didn't look too bad in that fight. He did get hurt, I think, a couple of times, but Martinez just never followed up. That said, though, skill for skill, I do think that Cannetti's probably still the better fighter in there. I think he's got pretty competent striking. He's got a, pretty solid kicking game as well. It does look like, he does put some power behind those. He can work in the clinch also, and, Cannetti has shown that he could wrestle and grapple a little bit. So overall, I do feel that Cannetti's a pretty well-rounded fighter. The only issue is, he is getting quite a bit up there in ages. He's been finished in 4 out of his 5 UFC losses, so, a ton of red flags surrounding Cannetti. But overall, skill for skill, I do think that he's still the better fighter and probably still the better athlete, even at this stage in his career, because Moutinho just does not shout, crazy athlete to me by any sense. So the pick for me is going to be Cannetti. I just have a lot of concerns about the age. The chin, I think, is going to be an issue. It was never that good to begin with. And, him getting, finished in 4 of his last 5 fights, very concerning here. Not sure if Moutinho's really got the power to really put Cannetti out here. But the other issue that I have with Cannetti, at 45 at bantamweight, you got to wonder about the cardio. If he's going to be able to go 3 hard rounds, if Moutinho's just backing him up, I'll fight. But overall, I still have to go with Cannetti here. I still think he's the better fighter. It's just the age concerns are a real factor here. I think Cannetti's the better striker, and I do think that he might have the better grappling as well. Because, I do think we still got some question marks surrounding Moutinho's, defensive grappling. Haven't really seen Moutinho on his back or taken down before. So I do think that's a potential path for Cannetti here. But again, I don't know if Cannetti's really got the cardio to aggressively wrestle for more than 7 or 8 minutes. But, he might be able to just do enough there to be able to eke out a decision. So ultimately, I think this is going to be a pretty close fight. But I got to side with Cannetti here. Probably won't have any action on this fight. unless money keeps coming in on Moutinho, because it does look like money is coming in on Moutinho. And if I can get like a decent plus number on Cannetti, I might have to put a small, like maybe half unit bet on Cannetti, just because I do feel this is a pretty 50-50 fight. Really, it's just the age putting me off of Cannetti here, but I do think he's the more skilled fighter overall. So I got to go with Cannetti, and give me Cannetti by unanimous decision. And in the next fight, we have Dalcha Lungiambula versus Cody Brundage, and Lungiambula is the minus 120 favorite. Comeback on Brundage is plus 100. And we'll start with the slight underdog in Brundage first. So from what I have seen from him, it does look like he's more of a wrestler. The guy does seem to have a bit of striking, but, I don't think it's really all that good. He's somewhat low volume there. Generally, he's just looking to throw power shots in there. But I do believe his strength is going to be in the wrestling. He's got a decent double leg along the cage. He's pretty strong in there. The guy's kind of explosive. However, I don't know if he's really that good on top. We've seen opponents on the regionals be able to escape from him on bottom. We saw William Knight do it on the Contender Series. And I think even in a few of his other Contenders fights, they were able to get up. And even in the Maximov fight, I think Maximov was able to beat him in a lot of the grappling exchanges. Overall, though, I'm just not really sold on Brundage. I think he's a decent athlete, but, outside of the wrestling, I really haven't seen too much that I like from him. He still is very green in his career, and furthermore, I don't think he's got the best cardio in there. It's not terrible, but I don't think he's got the cardio to implement like a wrestling heavy game plan. He got out-grappled by Maximov. He started strong in the Contender Series against Knight, but eventually got reversed and then got knocked out. Was eating like just a bunch of unanswered elbows to the side of the head, overcommitted to a takedown. And, I think that shows, potentially like some bad fight IQ as well. But, even on the regionals, he's not a super aggressive wrestler. I've seen him just stand and trade with opponents on the feet. And, he does look kind of labored in there after that, first round and a half or so. But fortunately for him, he's going to be up against Dalcha, who doesn't exactly have the best cardio in there either. The guy's just a big, muscly, explosive puncher in there. He does hit pretty hard, but is kind of low volume. I think it's because, Dalcha, he's smart about his pace, right? He knows that he can't sustain like a high volume, high output sort of fight. So, he does load up big on his shots and pick his shots in there so that he doesn't overexert himself. But, Dalcha definitely does have knockout power in there. He can offensively wrestle as well. I've seen him hit some nice trip takedowns. But overall, I do feel he's kind of reliant on his strength and, physicality to hold his opponents down. And again, I do think that his cardio is a little iffy. He hasn't like completely death-gassed in any of his fights yet, but he does a pretty good job of, limiting the output and fighting a generally like low-pace, low-output sort of fight. But I do see this fight going a number of different ways here. I think that, Dalcha probably takes it on the feet. I think he's the slightly better striker in there. I think he's going to be landing some of the heavier shots. That said, though, Dalcha, he does load up pretty big on his shots, and I do think he's a little slow for the division. And if he isn't able to connect that big shot, he's not a great minute winner. The guy's, generally pretty low output. And even when he is able to take opponents down, he's not the most active on top. So if this does go to a decision, I kind of favor Brundage just because I think that Brundage might have a little more output. And I do think that Brundage might have a little more success in the wrestling and grappling than Dalcha. And on top of that, Dalcha is someone who can get back down as well, which doesn't look all that great, so that combined with his low output can lead to a pretty close decision. But, I don't think it's impossible for Dalcha to win a decision either. I do think that he'll land some pretty heavy shots in there, and I do think that could be enough to sway the judges. Even in his fight against Marc-Andre Barriault, I do think Barriault won that fight somewhat clearly, but, he did have some moments in there, and I do think that Brundage is a significantly, worse striker than someone like Barriault. So I do think that Lungiambula will have some success in the striking, enough to the point where, if it does go to a decision, it's going to be pretty close. It could be, 50-50 or like maybe 55-45 in favor of Brundage. However, I do feel that Dalcha's got some knockout upside as well. Brundage is someone who doesn't have the best defensive tendencies on the feet, and I don't think that Brundage is a great striker as well. So, if this does play out on the feet, I do think that Dalcha's got some opportunities to find the knockout. So for that reason, I'm going to side with Dalcha here. I think that, he's got early knockout upside. I think that if it goes to decision, he could potentially win. And on top of that, Dalcha's, I think, fought just better guys in there. Brundage really hasn't fought anyone really that good on the regionals and even in the UFC. So I got to side with Dalcha here. I think he's got a few paths to victory. He's fought the better guys as well. So official pick for me is going to be Dalcha. I think he gets it done via round 1 knockout. Brundage really hasn't fought any good strikers. And the only other heavy hitter he's gone up against is William Knight, who was able to get him out of there. So I do think that Dalcha is going to have some success in the striking early. And I do think he might be able to find the chin of Brundage here. So I'm going to go with Dalcha here. Not super high confidence because, I do think that there are some holes in Dalcha's game that Brundage can take advantage of. And if Brundage is able to aggressively go to the wrestling, he could potentially, steal a decision here. But official pick for me is going to be Dalcha by round 1 knockout. And moving along, we have Miranda Maverick versus Sabina Mazo, and Maverick's the -260 favorite. Come back on. Mazo is +220, and we'll start with the underdog in Mazo first. So Mazo, she's a pretty tall, rangy striker in there. She's got pretty good output and volume, solid distance striking. She really does like to work the kicks, but, the issue with that is she doesn't really pack much power, I don't think, and she does seem to be a little slow in there. Her strikes are a little bit telegraphed, and honestly, she just got a slightly awkward movement in there. I think it's kind of easy for opponents to read a lot of her shots. But overall, I don't think it's that big of a deal. But what is a big deal for her is going to be the bottom game of Mazo. Her takedown defense actually isn't too bad. She's got pretty decent takedown defense, especially along the cage. But, if you can take her down, she can definitely get stuck on her back. Her get-up game is pretty bad. Her ground game off her back is pretty bad. So, if you're able to take her down, you do have a pretty good likelihood of, closing the round on top. So, outside of that, I don't think Mazo's too bad of a fighter. It's just that her defensive grappling is just, I think, a pretty big liability. And I do think that's going to be a pretty big concern in this fight, especially since she's going to be going up against Maverick, who is a pretty strong grappler in there. She's shown pretty good timing on her level change. Overall, she's just a very strong physical fighter as well. And once she's on top, she's very heavy there. She's shown pretty good jiu-jitsu as well. The striking, on the other hand, with Maverick, is definitely a work in progress. I think offensively, it's pretty serviceable. She does seem to have a bit of pop in her shots as well, but defensively, she's extremely hittable. I remember her just, I think, being teed off by Joshua, and so if this fight does play out on the feet, I definitely favor Mazo. I think she's gonna be able to land at will on Maverick, honestly, but I don't expect this fight to be on the feet for long. I think that Maverick is gonna look to take it to the ground, where it's pretty much just going to be Maverick all day. I think the skill level in terms of the grappling is much bigger between the two than the striking. So I do think that once Maverick is able to take Mazo down, she's going to look very dominant there. And, I do think that Maverick's going to be able to hit takedowns. She's shown pretty good wrestling, but I do think Mazo's going to leave a lot of openings with the kicks. Mazo does get pretty sloppy with some of her kicks, and she has had them caught and taken down from on multiple occasions. And I have seen Maverick catch kicks as well and work those into takedowns. So I think there's a big chance for Maverick to be hitting takedowns every single round here. So I'm definitely on the Maverick side here. I think there's a pretty clear path in terms of the wrestling and the grappling. I think that once Maverick is able to get the fight to the ground, it's going to be her the rest of the round. I think she's going to look very dominant on top. I think she can either get a potential finish with the ground and pound, or even a submission, or just ride her out for the remainder of the round and win a pretty clear decision here. So the pick for me is going to be Maverick. I do like her quite a bit in the spot. I think she matches up with Mazo pretty well. She's likely going to get picked apart at distance, but I do expect her to work the wrestling in as soon as possible. So give me Maverick here, and give me Maverick by decision. And moving along, we have Damon Jackson versus Kamuela Kirk, and Kamuela Kirk is the -155 favorite. Come back on. Jackson is +135, and a pretty interesting matchup here. I think we have two guys who match up pretty evenly stylistically. Both guys I think are primarily grapplers, but we'll start with Kirk first. Kirk is going to be making or fighting for the second time in the UFC here. But again, I do believe his background is in jiu-jitsu. The guy does seem to have, pretty solid grappling. The guy's got a ton of submissions on the regionals as well. The striking is really, not that great in my opinion. He's got some nice leg kicks in there, but generally does seem to be pretty low volume. He seems to do a little better when he's the one, pushing forward. If you have him on the back foot, he does seem to struggle a little bit. But the issue I think that I have with Kirk is he does seem to have low-key suspect cardio, and the argument might be a little weak because the fights that I am kind of basing this off of is the Billy Q and the Amirkhani fight, fights that you could definitely kind of excuse a bit, right? Billy Q's an absolute cardio machine, but early Kirk had a lot of success, but kind of fell off a cliff after that first round. And then in the Amirkhani fight, it was just a very sloppy back and forth fight. Granted, he was coming in short notice on that fight, but Amirkhani is someone who I think does not have great cardio in there. And, it was just a very sloppy sort of fight where I don't think either guy really put a stamp on it. But, if you kind of look at some of the other fights that Kirk has had on the regionals, I think in the Silva fight, he was very low output that fight, not a lot of action. And that's kind of how his fights play out when they do go to a decision. If he's not getting his opponents out of there early with a submission or something, he does tend to fight really close, in extended fights. And I suspect it's because his cardio is just not that great. If he goes too aggressively early, his cardio kind of dips and, he struggles as the fight progresses, which is also why I kind of suspect, his output's kind of low sometimes and why he gets backed up so easily in a lot of his fights. However, I would like to see him fight a few more times before I just completely write off his cardio or just pass judgment here. So taking a look at his opponent, Jackson, pretty similar situation. I think Jackson's primarily a grappler as well. Striking really not all that good, and the chin is definitely a liability. However, Jackson does a pretty solid job of fighting to his strengths. He's generally looking to get the fight to the ground, look to work the submission. But, the issue that I kind of have with Jackson is it looks like he tends to struggle a bit when he's up against guys that he doesn't have a big grappling edge against, right? Like every time we've seen him fight in the UFC, the guy is either getting finished either by submission or he's getting knocked out. He did win that fight against Bektic, but that was a fight he was losing for like a good 2.5 rounds before he was able to eventually find that submission. And Bektic is a very unreliable fighter as well. So, Jackson is someone who, he's going to do really well in the regionals. He's submitting guys left and right, but, once he does get that step up, he does struggle a good amount. And, he's going to be going up against Kirk, who I just don't have a great read on at the moment. I don't know if Kirk is UFC caliber. I'm kind of leaning on no. Kirk just has not really impressed me too much in most of his performances. And, I can kind of say the same about Jackson as well. I do like that he's got a ton of submission wins on the regionals, but, Kirk does seem to have, pretty solid jiu-jitsu as well. And, if Jackson isn't able to get Kirk out of there early, I think if, his submission defense holds up, this could just be a very sloppy back and forth, grindy sort of grappling affair. And if I did have to take a side here, I think I'm going to be leaning on the Jackson side. I think that, his cardio might be a little bit better than Kirk's, although I really don't rate the cardio of Jackson really highly either. But I think that if, it really came down to it, I got to edge it out to Jackson here. And then, of course, Jackson's got just far more experience. The guy's actually fought some, pretty solid regional guys, and, he's beating them, I think, pretty decisively. He's also got a ton more fights as well, but, at the end of the day, he does seem to struggle when he gets that step up. Now, I don't know if Kirk is going to be that step up, but I do think that Kirk will put up a pretty solid fight here. So, this is kind of a tricky fight, but I got to go with Jackson here. I got to go with the far more experienced guy in there. And I think that, he might be live for an early submission if there are indeed levels in terms of their grappling. And I do think that maybe he's able to get a late finish, maybe round 2, round 3 submission if the cardio of Kirk is not as good as I think it is. So I might just take a small sprinkle on the Jackson by submission or Jackson round 3 submission prop. Outside of that, no, I don't know if I want too much action on this fight. I think it's going to be a bit of a sweat if a finish doesn't materialize. I honestly see this being a pretty just back and forth, grindy, sloppy sort of a grappling affair. So official pick for me is going to be Damon Jackson here. I just got to go with the more experienced fighter. But yeah, official pick Damon Jackson. Give me round 3 submission. And in the next fight, we have Trevin Jones versus Javid Basharat. And Basharat's the minus 150 favorite. Comeback on Jones is plus 130. And we'll start with the underdog in Jones. I believe his base is actually in jiu-jitsu, but, he has shown, a solid striking game. He's got some good kicks in there, good inside-outside leg kick, a good front body kick as well. Does seem to have a bit of power as well. He does have some knockout wins over the likes of Batista and Valiev, but part of me feels that those might be, outliers. He hasn't really shown a ton of power outside of that. And outside of those 2 fights, he hasn't actually gotten any knockouts, but I think it might just be the way he fights, because I definitely do think that Jones, he's got some power in those hands. And if he's able to connect, I do think he could put a lot of guys out. But yeah, overall, Jones has shown pretty solid grappling on the regionals. He's shown that he's got crazy durability in there. I just took some crazy punishment from Valiev and was able to come back from that. However, the issue that I do have with Jones is that he's not exactly an output machine. He's not a great minute winner overall. If you just go through his record, you'll see that he's got a ton of split decisions. I think 6 or 7 of them. So, if this fight does go the distance, it is going to be a pretty close, pretty hairy sort of fight. However, I do think that, Jones potentially does have some, finishing upside. He does have some power. He does seem to have pretty solid grappling as well. So, Jones, I think, is a pretty inconsistent fighter, but I do think that overall he's not a terrible fighter. Basharat, on the other hand, he's making his UFC debut, looked pretty solid on his Contender Series fight. Absolutely just ran through his opponent. The guy's shown pretty good movement, pretty good mobility on the feet. He's got pretty good output in cardio as well. He has shown a pretty good top game also. He's very aggressive with the ground and pound on top. Shown some submission skills as well, but I'm not really sure how good his wrestling actually is, though. A lot of the fights that end up on the ground, it's either from like a caught kick or something, or he's in some weird scramble or is able to get a knockdown or something and is able to end up on top of his opponents. I haven't seen him just go and shoot a blast double or anything to suggest he's a good wrestler, but somehow the fights that he's in end up on the ground and he ends up on top. And from there, he does seem pretty aggressive, but overall, he is someone I think who's got pretty good output, pretty good pace and cardio. And honestly, I think this is kind of a weird fight to really get a good read on, because like I said before, Jones is a pretty inconsistent fighter. It's just kind of hard to know what to really expect from him fight to fight. He does have, again, finishing upside, but I think he's a bit more of an opportunist. He'll catch you coming in if you're not careful, or, if you're not careful in transitions and stuff, he could catch you in a submission as well. But from what I have seen in some of his other fights, if he's not able to find that finish, he is pretty low output. He will look to kind of wall install a bit like he did against Kakramanov before he got guillotined. But I do think that if he isn't able to get the finish, it does lead to, the fights being a lot closer than they should be. I like the volume and output of Basharat, but I do think that Jones has got some skills and tools that could mitigate some of that output and volume. For one, he's a very heavy hitter in there, and when you're up against a heavy hitter, you're usually a little less likely to throw as much as you usually do. A little more tentative in there, and you're a little more reserved with some of your strikes, leaving fewer openings. And on top of that, Jones has shown that he can grind out a fight if, he wants to, just hold his opponent up against the cage, maybe work his grappling a little bit. And that's a good way to really dampen the pace a bit. So for this fight, I think I am going to pick Jones here. It's tough. It's very close. I do think that if this goes to decision, I slightly favor Basharat, but I do think Jones can make it close, and I do think that Jones will have some opportunities to get the finish as well. And on top of that, I do think Jones has fought the far higher level of competition. I mean, just his UFC run alone, he's faced guys that I think are just a level above someone like Basharat, right? He gets matched up against Valiev on short notice in his debut, and then fights Batista, was able to get the finish in both of those fights, and then goes up against Kakramanov. I think was probably on his way to winning that fight if he didn't get caught in that guillotine super late. So I think Jones is a pretty decent fighter who's fought really good guys in there. Whereas, Basharat, he does look decent in a lot of his fights, but, he's fighting a lot of lower level guys. So overall, I do favor Jones in terms of, just the level of competition and even the UFC experience. So, I like Jones here, especially, at dog odds. I might, put a tiny bit on him. I think he can win in a number of ways, potentially via knockout, submission, or by split decision. So, just give me Jones in this spot. And moving along, we have Gillian Robertson versus JJ Aldrich. And Robertson's the minus 155 favorite, come back on. Aldrich is plus 135. And we'll start with the underdog in Aldrich. So Aldrich, she's primarily a striker in there. She's quite aggressive, likes to move forward, pressure opponents. She's got a pretty decent output in volume. She's shown that she could work in the clinch as well. She's got decent footwork and distance management. Haven't seen, too much from her takedown defense recently or from her defensive grappling. But, in some of her older fights, she does seem to have okay takedown defense. We have to go all the way back to the Viana fight where there was a short exchange. Viana had her down, but she was able to get the reversal, which I thought was a pretty good look. Viana is a black belt, and Aldrich was able to reverse her there. And then all the way back in her debut against Lima, where she actually did a decent job of defending some of those takedowns and eventually working her way back up to her feet. And, I don't think she looked too bad, all things considered. It was her debut. She was very young in that fight, and that was over like 5 years ago. So I do think that she's probably made some improvements since then, but by and large, she's really only fought strikers in there. But she's going to be going up against Robertson, who is primarily a grappler. Robertson, her wrestling, I think, is okay. It's really not that great. She really does like to just dive on that single. She's got a decent reactive takedown, but, I feel like most of her entries are kind of telegraphed. And overall, I do feel that Robertson's a little slow in there. And Robertson isn't really someone that will chain takedowns together either. If you're able to stuff that first takedown from her, she will look to just get back at distance and strike a little bit before shooting again. So, while she is somewhat persistent with it, she isn't someone that will just kind of chain takedowns together. However, if she is able to get her opponents to the ground, she is pretty vicious there. She's got very slick submissions there. She's also very aggressive with the ground and pound also. Sometimes she could get maybe a little over aggressive with the submission attempts. She is someone who has been a little submission over a position at times, and that could give away advantageous positions in some of her fights. But overall, I do think that she's a pretty solid grappler, and she could be pretty dangerous in there, especially if she's able to get into a dominant position. But man, this is a pretty interesting matchup. I think we have your typical striker versus grappler. Aldrich, I do think, is going to be the better striker in there. Robertson, again, is a little slow on the feet. I think she loads up a lot on her shots, and she doesn't seem really all that comfortable there, honestly. So yeah, I do favor Aldrich on the feet. Robertson is pretty hittable, and I've watched a few of her fights, and it doesn't look like she's really made too many improvements in the striking department. However, she is pretty consistent to looking to get the fight into the grappling realm, but I just don't know if her wrestling is going to be good enough in this matchup to get it there consistently, or to get her enough control time to win the fight here. Because like I said, Aldrich, I do think, has pretty good footwork and pretty good distance management. And Robertson, she does telegraph a lot of her entries. I think that Aldrich is probably going to be seeing some of these takedown attempts coming from a mile away. The only way I see Robertson maybe hitting some takedowns is if Aldrich gets a little over-aggressive, over-swings a little bit, and Robertson's able to hit a reactive takedown or something. But I don't know if Robertson's going to have too much success taking Aldrich down. Aldrich has shown pretty good cardio, pretty good balance in there. So I think she's going to be able to eventually work her way back up and, keep the fight standing long enough to win the striking exchanges. So I definitely do lean Aldrich here, but, it's not like a super high confidence pick. I do think the margins are pretty thin here. I think that Robertson, she will have some success with the grappling. I just don't think that it's going to be enough. So, give me Aldrich here. I think that Aldrich should be able to win a pretty close competitive decision. I think she'll be able to keep it standing long enough to do enough on the feet to win maybe like a 29-28 decision. So, give me Give me Aldrich. Give me Aldrich by decision. And in the next fight, we have Matthew Semelsberger versus AJ Fletcher. And Semelsberger's the minus 250 favorite. Come back on Fletcher's plus 210. So we'll start with the underdog in Fletcher, who's also making his UFC debut. So from what I have seen, it looks like he's more of a wrestler, a grappler type. He does seem to have a little power on the feet. He's generally looking to just wing, those overhands and, throw heavy leg kicks in there. He does seem to have a bit of power, but overall, his striking isn't really the best. Just a lot of single shots in there. Generally just looking to close the distance, really work his wrestling, his grappling. He's got pretty good timing on his level change. He's got a nice reactive double in there. And once he's on top of his opponent, he is pretty heavy there. However, I'm not completely sold on his grappling just yet. It does look like he's able to just out-muscle a lot of low-level guys on the regionals. And he's actually getting them out of there pretty early as well. So I definitely do have some reservations on the Fletcher side. And he's going to be going up against Matthew Semelsberger, who's, I think, a pretty decent striker in there. He's got a pretty nice jab, a good overhand right, nice right cross as well. He's got two pretty quick finishes at the UFC. He fought pretty competitively with Chaos as well. He showed really good toughness and heart in that fight. He took a bit of damage those first two rounds, but was able to rally in the third after taking a decent amount of damage and, giving a pretty good account of himself. I think I did score that last round for him, and I think all the judges scored it for him as well, but Semelsberger, I do think is pretty good offensively, and he has shown that he can hit some offensive takedowns as well. The only concern that I do have with this game is that, his takedown defense isn't particularly great, and, I have seen him taken down and held down on the regionals, mainly the Kamchabekov fight where, Kamchabekov was able to, I think, take him down in the first and the third round, and Semelsberger just didn't really show any urgency to really work his way back up. Honestly looked a little lost off his back there, but, he is still pretty young. He could be making improvements. That fight was about 3 years ago. That said, though, when it comes to this fight, I do think that there still are a lot of questions on both sides. The only thing that I'm somewhat certain of is that Semelsberger is going to win it on the feet. I just think that he's the superior striker. I think his hands are just much cleaner, much crisper in there. The questions are just going to be whether or not his takedown defense and get-up game has improved. He hasn't really been tested since that Kamchabekov fight. I think Witt was supposed to be a bit of a challenge there, but he ended up starting him early. And for the Fletcher side, I'm just not really sure how good he really is. Because for the most part, he's really only beaten bums, and he's gotten a ton of finishes early, so he hasn't faced a ton of adversity in any of his fights. I have no idea how he's going to look when he gets extended, how his cardio is going to hold up. Maybe he's able to get some takedowns early and win the early rounds. But I just have no idea how he's going to look, come that second and third round. And, if his cardio doesn't hold up, I can see someone like Semelsberger who's got pretty sharp striking in there. He's got pretty good power. He might be able to get the finish come that second or third round. But on the other hand, Semelsberger hasn't exactly shown the best grappling cardio in there. I want to reference the Kamchabekov fight again, but, after that first round, when he got taken down, he seemed to slow down quite a bit afterwards. He wasn't completely gassed or anything, but, the output did wane a little bit. He did seem a little more labored in there, and he just wasn't landing with the power that he was, earlier in the fight. So, I could see a situation where, Fletcher is able to get that takedown early and is able to wear on the cardio of Semelsberger enough so that, he's not able to do as much damage come that second round. And maybe Fletcher is able to use that second round to recuperate a little bit and, get some takedowns, come that third round. So, I do think this is a pretty high variance fight. Both guys, I think, do have the tools to succeed here. Both guys, I think, are still somewhat improving. So, I do think this is a pretty high variance fight overall, but if I had to take a side here, I think I got to side with Semelsberger. Don't really like the price tag, honestly, because I do think that there still are some unanswered questions in regards to his takedown defense and his get-ups, but I do favor his striking overall. I just think he's the much more proven striker in there. And the big question is going to just be the takedown defense. So overall, I definitely do have to go with Semelsberger here. He's a little more proven. He's fought through a bit of adversity as well, and if his takedown defense holds up, I do think he should be the rightful favorite here. So give me Semelsberger, and I'll just take him to win via round 2 knockout. But yeah, I think he could win via decision as well. And moving along, we have what should be a pretty fun fight between Alex Pereira and Bruno Silva. Pereira's the minus 165 favorite comeback on. Silva is plus 145. And we'll start with the underdog in Silva first. So Silva, he's a very fun fighter to watch. He's got very heavy hands in there. A little wild with the striking. The guy's got some very vicious ground and pound. But honestly, I don't know if I've got the greatest read on him just yet. Most fights do end pretty early for him. They end inside the distance a lot of the time. And a lot of the time, his opponents are looking to take him down, neutralize that striking of his. But in a lot of these fights, we see him, kind of just tire his opponents out. He's able to weather the grappling storm, and he's able to eventually get the finish later in the fights or early in the fights. But I feel this is a potential turntables moment here for Silva, because I don't know if he's going to want to look to stand and trade with Pereira. I think he's going to be the one that's looking to grapple in this fight, because I think we all know what Pereira brings to the table here. The guy's a world-class kickboxer, super accredited there. The guy beat Izzy twice, yada, yada, yada. He's got one of the most devastating left hooks on the planet. But the issue, of course, is going to be the fact that he's still very green, MMA-wise. He's only got, I think, 5 fights, professionally in MMA. We saw in his most recent fight, Michailidis was able to get pretty significant control time on Pereira. And Michailidis, I don't think, is a really good grappler or really a grappler at all. And, he was able to control him for, I think, 3 or 4 minutes in that first round before eventually eating that knee in the second. But, I do think that in this matchup, Silva's going to be the significantly better grappler. I think Silva's probably the better grappler than Michailidis. Silva is supposedly a black belt. We just really haven't seen it on display. We've seen him maybe use it defensively, but haven't really seen him go to it offensively. In fact, if anyone's got footage of, Bruno Silva, hitting takedowns, what he looks like, when it comes to the submissions, feel free to, just shoot me a link or something, because I'd love to check it out. I've watched some of his recent fights, and a lot of it's just striking, and a lot of it's him, defending takedowns and submissions and stuff, but not so much him, shooting takedowns and, looking to aggressively grapple. Because I do feel for this fight, Silva's going to have to go to his grappling to potentially win the fight here. I think it'd be pretty ill-advised for Silva to look to stand and bang with someone like Pereira. It'd probably end pretty badly for him. But man, this fight's tough to call, because, the fight does start standing, and, with someone like Silva, he does get a little wild, a little reckless in there. And who knows, man, maybe the guy's got a bit of an ego with him. He's going to look to maybe box a little bit with Pereira. But as far as an official pick goes, I got to be on the Silva side here. I have to go with the guy who's got a ton more MMA experience, more UFC experience, and overall is just the better mixed martial artist. But, at the end of the day, I can't be overly confident in it, because Pereira does have a pretty big advantage on the feet, and Silva I've just not seen him aggressively look to grapple. So I can't bank on him looking to do it in this fight, but I do feel that's probably going to be the game plan, from his camp going into this fight. So I think if Silva is able to get Pereira down on the mat, he might be able to get a submission, potentially get the ground and pound finish, because Pereira's just not really looked all that good off his back or against the cage, or in control positions. So I got to go with Silva here, to hit takedowns and hopefully win on the mat here. But otherwise, if it's standing, I do see Pereira eventually getting the finish. I think the under is probably not a bad play here, or fight doesn't go the distance. I do think that either Silva is able to get the takedowns and is able to get the finish, in a dominant position, or we see Pereira eventually just find the chin of Silva and knock him out. But official pick for me is going to be Bruno Silva by round 1 submission. And moving along, we have Drew Dober versus Terrence McKinney. Dober's the minus 225 favorite. Comeback on McKinney is plus 185. And McKinney is going to be stepping in short notice on this fight. Dober initially slated to go up against Ricky Glenn. McKinney coming off of a submission win against Ziem about, I think, 2 weeks ago. This should be a pretty fun fight for as long as it lasts. Most of McKinney and Dober's fights happen that way. McKinney, someone who will come out really aggressively, and Dober just a really high-level striker who's routinely put on really fun fights. But we'll start with Dober first. The guy's a very high-level striker in there. He's got great footwork. Really good kicking game, really good combination punching, great counter punching as well. He does a good job of fighting off his back foot, but I do feel he does his best work when he's moving forward and pressuring. Of course, the big hole I think in Dober's game is going to be in the grappling. He just has not shown really good takedown defense, and is really not that good off his back. He's losing to some really solid grapplers in there like Makhachev and Dariush and even OAM, but even non-wrestlers like Riddell and Hernandez and even Frank Camacho were able to get some of his wrestling going. And, I'd say most recently in that Riddell fight, Riddell was able to go to his wrestling to really win that fight for him because, the striking exchanges were pretty close. And Riddell, is a kickboxer by trade in there. And, he was able to have, some wrestling success and some top control time against Dober. And so it looks like, after all these years, Dober really just has not done a great job of shoring up that part of his game. And that's definitely going to be a big concern here because, McKinney is someone who is going to start off the fight very aggressively. I mean, the guy's just an absolute monster in that first round. He puts it all on the table. He's kind of known for his explosive striking a bit, but I do believe his base is going to be in the wrestling. And, the guy is a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, but the most important thing is the fact that McKinney just starts super aggressively. The guy just goes all out early for the finish. He's very aggressive with the ground and pound, and he's got good submission skills as well. He's not out there just running through opponents, via submission. He's not some like high-level submission artist, but he does a good job of integrating it into his game. He does a really good job of, softening his opponents up with the ground and pound and letting the submissions present itself. And when they do, he's pretty good at snatching them up. Overall, I do think that McKinney's a pretty strong wrestler, pretty solid grappler as well. Obviously not on the level of guys like Dariush or Makhachev, but the aggression that McKinney fights at early in the fight makes him just as dangerous, I think. However, it's very high risk, high reward. When he's going that hard early, he does have a pretty good chance of finishing a lot of guys in the division, but, it does leave him pretty vulnerable outside of that first round because he will have expended a ton of his cardio then. And, Drew Dober is not really the type of guy you really want to be gassed against because Dober is going to be levels ahead in terms of the striking here. McKinney, he is a pretty explosive striker, but in terms of, the technique and the experience, he's not even close to Dober's level. So, his best shot's going to be to probably take Dober down early and, hopefully get the finish. Otherwise, he's just going to gas out, and I see Dober finding the finish come that second round. But I do feel that McKinney's actually very alive in that first round, maybe a little more than a lot of people would expect. I know a lot of people are probably going to reference the Makhachev fight, that it took Makhachev 2.5 rounds before, finally getting the finish. But, I don't think Makhachev was really going for it early in the fight. I think he was kind of conserving himself a little bit, didn't want to overexert, and then found that, near the end of the fight, he was able to get the submission and, be a little more aggressive as the time was winding down. But I do feel that if McKinney started off really aggressively in that fight, I do think that he's live. I think that Dober, still has pretty big holes in his takedown defense and defensive grappling. That said, though, this is a very big step up in competition for McKinney. And if he isn't able to get Dober out of there, I definitely see Dober getting the second round finish just because McKinney's going to be way too tired after that first round. So I do feel that there's really two ways that this fight plays out. If I had to make an official pick, though, I think I'm going to go with McKinney here. I think he gets it done in the first round. But I can definitely see Dober weathering it early. So the way I think I'm really going to play this fight is just McKinney in round 1 and then Dober in round 2, or even just looking to play the unders here because McKinney really hasn't shown that, he's going to look to pace himself. He's still very much a quick, aggressive starter. And, him coming in short notice, I do think that he's going to look to try and end the fight early again. So yeah, I like the unders in this spot. I like McKinney round 1 and Dober round 2. I wouldn't really recommend playing the money line for either side just because minus like 220 I think is pretty steep for Dober, who still does have that pretty big hole in his game, and then plus 180 is not a ton of value on McKinney considering most of his win equities tied up in that first round. So you may as well just play him in that first round or just play him by finish because I don't see him winning any other way. I don't see him, getting a decision or anything. And then for the Dober side, I'd recommend just taking the inside the distance prop as well, because if he is able to weather that storm of McKinney early, he's probably going to be able to get the finish. So official pick for me is just going to be McKinney round 1, but really just the violence in this fight is probably the best way to attack it. And moving along, we have Khalil Roundtree versus Karl Robertson, and Roundtree's the minus 115 favorite. Comeback on Robertson is minus 105, so we're getting pretty much near a pick'em for this fight. But a pretty interesting matchup here because I do feel we have two somewhat unreliable fighters going at it. More so Roundtree. Roundtree is someone who's had performances that have pretty much been all over the map. If we just go over his record real quick, the guys he's beaten, the guys he's lost to, it's kind of all over the place. He's got knockout wins over the likes of Paul Craig and Gokhan Saki. And then, he was able to put on an absolute clinic against someone like Anders. Although Anders really looked just lost in there in that fight. But, he's also getting outstruck by Oleksiejczuk and getting taken down by Oleksiejczuk. He's got knockout losses to Kudalaba and Walker, two very explosive guys in there. But, he's also getting outstruck by guys like Marcin Prachnio, which, really took me by surprise. But then, he's also coming off of a really solid performance against Bukauskas. Was able to get the knockout finish. Well, I think he actually, blew out his knee. I think he knee stomped him, actually. But even before that, he was touching up Bukauskas and looked really good for that first round and a half before he destroyed the knees of Bukauskas. But overall, Roundtree is someone, who can strike in there. He's definitely got some power on the feet. But you just don't know what to really expect from him sometimes. Sometimes he could just look like a world beater out there. And sometimes he'll just put on a very flat performance. So somewhat inconsistent in that regards, but he is, I think, pretty dangerous when it comes to the striking. He does have some power in there as well. And he's going to be going up against Robertson, who is primarily a kickboxer. The guy's got pretty good striking. He moves pretty well in there. His output is solid. I think his hands are pretty crisp. He's got a good kicking game as well, very diverse. But he does seem to have some questionable fight IQ, and I'm mainly referring to his fight against Brendan Allen, where he just decides to play leg locks in there with Brendan Allen, a guy who's much more fluid on the ground, a guy who's got just levels above him in terms of the grappling. I feel like if he could have kept that fight standing, he would have had a lot more success there. I thought he'd be the much better striker in that matchup, but decided to play around a little too long on the ground, and he got caught. But I guess if there's any silver lining in that, it's that Robertson has actually shown that he could wrestle and grapple a little bit, albeit a little ill-advised against Allen. He has shown before that, he can hit some takedowns, and he will, play jiu-jitsu sometimes with some of his opponents. He did show in the tournament in the Kopylov fight that he does seem to have some decent grappling defense, and, might have gotten a little overconfident in the Allen fight, but I do feel that overall he might be the more well-rounded fighter compared to someone like Roundtree. So, if there's anything you can take away from that, it's that, Roberson's not afraid to take this fight to the ground and be outside of his element for a little bit. But taking a look at this matchup, I do favor Robertson a bit on the feet. I think he moves a little better there. I think he might just be a little quicker as well. I do like the diversity in his strikes that he brings to the table. Also, I do favor the power of Roundtree a little bit more, but I do think that the movement of Robertson could give Roundtree some trouble there. I do think that over the course of 3 rounds, he might be able to outwork and outstrike Roundtree. And I do feel that if Robertson does decide to look to wrestle and grapple a little bit, he'll have a bit more success here. I really don't rate the takedown defense or the defensive grappling of Roundtree all that much, and so I feel that if Robertson's in a bit of trouble, he could just potentially hit a takedown to get himself out of trouble, to buy himself a little time, or just to hit some takedowns to potentially win some minutes as well. So, overall, I do favor Robertson here. I think with a half-decent game plan, he could do pretty well. In hindsight, look like a much bigger favorite. The only issue is, if he's going to be able to adhere to that game plan, because, again, the guy has shown pretty poor fight IQ, and, I can't see a way how, he could really botch this fight, but, with poor IQ, it always seems to find a way, and so, I do like the Robertson side here. I just don't know if I want to go too big on it, because, Robertson is someone who has found ways to kind of drop the ball. But at a pick'em now where it is, I do feel there's some potential value here. I just don't know what the sizing is going to be in terms of the bet. But, I do favor Robertson to win here. I like him on the feet. I think he's a bit more well-rounded. So, yeah, give me Robertson here. And, I think a sneaky angle was potentially Robertson by submission. I think if it's a nice juicy number, it's worth a small poke here, because Robertson has shown that He will hit takedowns, and he does have a few submission wins on his record here. He's not some like high-level submission artist, but I do think it's a little more opportunistic for him. And I do feel that Roundtree's submission defense and ground game is just not really up to par. So I do think that there are going to be opportunities for Robertson to snatch it up. I'm not saying it's a lock or anything, but I do think that if it's like +7, +800, it might be worth a shot. But official pick for me is going to be Robertson. I like him to win via decision. And moving along, we have Alex Caceres versus Sodiq Yusuff. And Yusuff's the -225 favorite come back on. Caceres is +190. And we'll take a look at Yusuff here first. So he's a young prospect, pretty good striker in there. He's got a good jab, 1-2, and a leg kick. He's also got pretty heavy hands as well. Only thing I do have to criticize him a little bit for is probably the footwork and in his cage cutting. He does have a pretty bad habit of kind of chasing opponents around a little bit. And, lastly, I think the chin is a little worrisome. I don't think it's too big of a deal right now. He's been finished once, I think, but I've seen him rocked and wobbled on a couple occasions. He's shown pretty good recoverability. And for this matchup, I don't think it's going to be too big of an issue, but going forward, it is something to keep in the back of your mind here. But he's going to be going up against Caceres here, who, not exactly a big power puncher. Caceres is a bit more of a point fighter. The guy's got pretty good volume on the feet, pretty good output. But generally, he's just looking to touch his opponents, stay on the outside, work the leg kicks, work the jab. The guy does a pretty good job of just kind of flowing on the outside and just touching his opponents. And he's also, I believe, a black belt in there as well. Did show off the jiu-jitsu in his most recent fight. Was able to pull off a comeback submission win against Sungwoo Choi. So Caceres, he has shown a bit of grappling that he can go to, but the guy does generally prefer to look to strike in there. But taking a look at this matchup, it should be a pretty interesting matchup here, a pretty fun one. Both guys are probably going to look to strike in there. Personally, I'm definitely a bit more on the Yusuff side. I think he's going to be the much heavier hitter in there. I think he might be a little quicker as well. On top of that, Yusuff does have the youth advantage as well. However, I do feel that if this goes to a decision, it can play out pretty closely because I can definitely see the lateral movement of Caceres giving Yusuff a bit of trouble. But at the same time, I do think that the power is going to be enough to really edge Yusuff in the spot here. On top of that, I do feel that Yusuff's going to have a bit of finishing upside as well. We did see Caceres get cracked pretty badly in his most recent fight against Sungwoo Choi, and he's a bit lucky to have come away with that fight because, Choi had him hurt pretty bad early in that first round. And if Choi hadn't kneed him illegally, he probably would have been able to swarm Caceres for the TKO finish. So, a little fortunate for him, but Caceres did show a lot of toughness and grit in that fight, was able to come back and get the submission in the second round there. But in this matchup, I feel that if Yusuff is able to land that cleanly, he's probably going to get the finish here. And I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility that we see Yusuff get the finish because Caceres, he does like to throw a lot of those naked leg kicks. And if Yusuff is able to get the timing down, just line him up for a nice, counter shot, he could potentially put him out, do a lot of damage because Yusuff does have quite a bit of power in there. I will say this, though. I don't think that Yusuff is quite as fast and as sharp as Sungwoo Choi, but I could be wrong because, it's kind of hard to gauge these sort of things, but I do feel Choi's got some of the sharpest, quickest hands in the division at the moment. Regardless, I do think that Yusuff's going to be able to land, and I do think he's going to be able to find some openings. So for that reason, I'm going to side with Yusuff here. I feel the line is about right. If you had to force me to bet a side here, I'd probably bet Yusuff even at like this pretty chalky number because I do feel that if it goes to a decision, Yusuff, he could get it done, even though it'd be, I think, by a pretty narrow margin. But I do think that Yusuff's got a bit of knockout upside as well. Like, even if he isn't able to knock Caceres out, I do think he'd be able to get some knockdowns, which could, heavily, sway the rounds in his favor. So I'm going to go with Yusuff here as the official pick. I think I'm just going to actually take him to win by unanimous decision. And moving along in the co-main event, we have Marlon Moraes versus Song Yadong, and Song Yadong's the -230 favorite come back on. Moraes is +195, And we'll start with Moraes first. So I think we all kind of know the deal with Moraes. He's a very quick, explosive striker in there. Probably one of, if not the most dangerous striker in that first round. I think the guy's got a ton of finishing upside early. He's got very quick, heavy hands in there. He likes to slam that leg kick and set up that head kick, which is super potent. He's got a number of knockouts that way. He's hurt opponents in that fashion as well. Overall, I think the guy's just extremely live to finish in round one against anyone, honestly. But of course, the guy's got absolutely atrocious cardio. He's absolutely jacked in there, on top of the fact that he puts a ton of heat in his shots. So the cardio is just not able to keep up after that first round and a half. Granted, he has gone the distance before, in lower pace fights. We saw that in the Santos fight in his debut, and then also against the Aldo, right, where he was able to go the distance in those fights, but those weren't very high-paced affairs. Neither guy was throwing too much. He did a decent job of pacing himself in both of those matchups. However, I do feel that if you're able to push a pace on him, or if you're able to mix in any sort of wrestling or grappling, the guy's just going to get completely cooked in there. But the issue, in this matchup is I just don't know if Song Yadong's going to be able to bring it. Song Yadong, he is a pretty good striker in there. He's got pretty quick hands. He likes to blitz in and put combinations together, and has shown, pretty good power as well. Pretty solid output, can go 3 hard rounds, but, Song Yadong isn't someone who's like a big, pressure fighter. He will kind of fight in bursts in there and look to reset, which I do feel is something that Moraes might be able to weather. So stylistically, I don't think that this is a terrible matchup for Moraes, but the cardio I think is still a pretty big factor because there's other things that come into play, right? Like he could potentially hurt Song Yadong early and swarm him for the finish and not get the finish, and then he'll have gassed himself out regardless. Song Yadong has shown really good toughness and durability. He did eat that head kick from Phillips like nothing, was able to just kind of keep walking forward and still do damage, but that's not something you want to read too much into. Obviously, it is a good look that he was able to continue to fight through that, but you don't want to put too much stock in it. Just because he ate that head kick from Phillips doesn't mean he'll be able to continuously eat head kicks from someone like Moraes, because I do feel that if something like that lands from Moraes, he could have Song Yadong in a ton of trouble. And again, I do feel that Moraes is live to finish a lot of guys in the division in that first round, so you really can't count him out. But overall, I still have to lean on the youth, the durability, and the cardio of Yadong here. But the minus 220 price tag is a bit off-putting. It definitely feels a bit wide. I know people are probably looking to fade Moraes here. The guy's coming off of 3 finish losses, but stylistically, I don't know if Yadong is going to be similar to guys like, Sandhagen, Font, and definitely not Merab, but, guys like Sandhagen and Font are, I think, taller, lankier guys for the division. They have good distance striking. They have good distance management and are really just crafty strikers in there overall. They also have, pretty good defensive striking as well. And you do also have to factor in the fact that Moraes was coming in 2 months after getting head kicked against Sandhagen against Font. So that was a pretty weird fight, right? Where Moraes actually went to the wrestling in that fight and just gassed himself out and then got dropped by a jab, essentially. And then Merab is just a crazy, durable wrestler with, crazy cardio in there and was able to weather that storm. And, I don't know how much of those attributes Song Yadong really brings to the table. I don't think he's a great distance striker like Sandhagen or Font. And, I don't think that Moraes is going to look to wrestle early in this fight and gas himself out. I don't think Song Yadong's going to look to aggressively wrestle either. So, it really will just come down to how Song Yadong's going to weather the storm, or if he's going to push a pace, which, I'm not entirely convinced that he's going to be able to do. And if I'm being honest, I don't know if Team Alpha Male's the camp that'll, fully prep him to put him in the best position to win in this fight. Team Alpha Male's got, it's a pretty big camp with a lot of bodies there, but I just have not seen the best performances from their guys in terms of, game planning, in terms of, adding new wrinkles to their game, because Song Yadong's more or less been the same fighter since he's, joined the UFC. The guy's got big power, very fast hands, but, maybe his, cardio's improved a bit, his conditioning's improved a little bit, and, some of his takedown defense has, but by and large, he's still more or less the same fighter in there, and I just don't know if, Team Alpha Male's the camp to really do it, because you see other guys in the camp like Feely and Cody Garbrandt, who their game's really not evolved much at all at that camp. Low-key, I feel Team Alpha Male's kind of flown under the radar in terms of, big camps that kind of aren't that great, kind of like Fortis here, but, I've kind of gone on a bit of a tangent, but just going back to this matchup, I do think that it could be somewhat high variance in terms of the outcomes, because it really comes down to a few things, actually. It'll depend on really the game plan of Song Yadong coming into this, and of course, how aggressive Moraes is going to be as well, because with how explosive he is, if he's able to land anything, or if anything gets through, he could potentially swarm Song Yadong for the finish. But if he isn't able to, he might gas himself out and he could get finished. Or if, Song's not pushing the pace in there and is able to defend well against Moraes, we could see this eke to the over. And, that is a possibility as well. But, official pick for this fight, I got to go with Song Yadong here. I just cannot trust the chin and the cardio of Moraes at this point in his career. Obviously, he's always going to be live early in the fight, but I favor Song Yadong if it goes to a decision, and I do think that he could potentially get the knockout as well if Moraes gasses out. But I wouldn't be completely surprised if this ekes to the over. But my pick is going to be Song Yadong for this fight. I think he gets it done by a round 2 knockout. And in the main event, we have Magomed Ankalaev versus Thiago Santos, and Ankalaev's the minus 460 favorite. Comeback on Santos is plus 360, and we'll start with Ankalaev first. So Ankalaev, very big favorite in this fight, and almost rightfully so, right? The guy's a very high-level striker. He's got good footwork in there, very good distance management. He does a really good job of fighting behind the jab, and generally I think his output is okay. However, I guess one of the knocks on Ankalaev is the fact that he does tend to coast a little bit in some of his fights. He'll do just enough to win on the cards, and it's worked well enough for him so far, but, with how some of the judging is lately, I would like to see a little more aggression from him, but, he does play it pretty safe in there. He does have, pretty decent power, especially when he does decide to sit down on his shots. And on top of that, he has shown that he could offensively wrestle as well. I don't think his wrestling's like phenomenal or anything, but it is quite good in there. It has, helped him, close out rounds, win rounds that way. So yeah, the guy's, I think, a very, high-level striker, very well-rounded overall. I really don't have too many bad things to say about him. I guess really the only criticism is that he got choked out by Paul Craig in his debut in like the last second. So maybe he's someone that, panics under pressure. I'm definitely, stretching it a little bit, but it's kind of hard to say because he's kind of just run through his opponents since then, hasn't really faced a ton of adversity. So that's really the only black mark on him. But outside of that, he's looked really solid everywhere. And honestly, I don't even know if he's going to be facing a ton of pressure this fight. Santos he's a big hitter for sure, but he just has not really looked like himself lately. Honestly, he's kind of looked like just a shell of his former self after getting double knee surgery, after that loss to John Jones. He did show some flashes against Teixeira, but ultimately he did get finished that fight. And in the fight after that, he lost a pretty low-paced kicking affair with Rakic, and he also got kind of dominated in the grappling there. There wasn't a ton of wrestling success, but or there wasn't a ton of wrestling that happened, but when it did happen, Rakic was able to kind of just hold him down for the remainder of the rounds. And then he's coming off of a very low-paced striking affair with Walker, a fight that he did win, but it was a very close fight and a very uneventful fight. But he just did not really look good in any of those performances, outside of him hurting Teixeira early. But, that was a much older, much slower Teixeira who was ultimately able to weather the storm. But basically what I'm trying to get at is, Santos just really hasn't looked all that good. He's been very gun-shy in there. And that's just a really bad look because historically Santos is someone who's, a very big finisher, someone who, gets a lot of knockouts, a lot of submissions, but, you're not going to get those if you're just not throwing in there. And lately Santos has kind of just been content to kind of play at distance, work the kicks and occasionally just blitz in and throw a couple hammers in there. But, none of them are really connecting. And, it looks like maybe the age and the wear and tear is starting to catch up to Santos a bit here. And, he isn't able to connect on some of those bombs lately. And the only person that he was able to connect on was like a 40-year-old Teixeira. So not looking good for Santos lately. And he's going up against a tough young prospect in Ankalaev, who, is very technical on the feet. He's going to be, I think, the much more natural light heavyweight in Ankalaev. Ankalaev, I think, should be able to pick Santos apart on the feet here at distance. I can kind of see this playing out similarly to the Rakic fight, where Ankalaev is just going to be able to kind of just kick at Santos, really work the jab, the 1-2. And maybe even mix in the wrestling, because we've seen Santos struggle a bit with the takedown defense and his get-ups. So I think that there's a ton of paths to victory here for Ankalaev. I think the odds are, quite justified here. I think that outside of Santos just landing a big bomb, he's going to have a hard time winning in general. Now, I will say this, though, as I guess kind of a little counterpoint or just, playing a devil's advocate a little bit. Ankalaev is someone who fights close, and the last two of Santos's fights, they were pretty close fights, pretty low-paced fights, and some of these judges out there are literally on crack, and some of the scorecards these past couple of weeks were very questionable, and if this does go the distance in what is going to be maybe a somewhat uneventful 5-rounder, it could get a little dicey in there, especially if you're holding a ticket on a minus 500 favorite. All your parlays are anchored on Ankalaev, and he fights to a very close decision. It could get very sweaty in there, but ultimately, I do think that Ankalaev gets it done. I think he's going to be able to do enough on the feet, throw enough volume to win soundly on the scorecards. And if he needs to, maybe mix in some of the wrestling as well to help really seal off some of the rounds. So, yeah, I'm definitely on the Ankalaev side here. He's just the much more technical striker in there. He's going to be the younger fighter as well. Has more of a light heavyweight frame, and I do think he's got some wrestling upside as well. And really just outside of Santos maybe blitzing in and finding that one big power shot, I just don't see him really being able to win anywhere else. So, give me Ankalaev here, and give me Ankalaev via unanimous decision. It's probably going to be a somewhat tepid affair. It's not going to be like crazy back and forth. I do think that we see Ankalaev kind of pull ahead on the striking in the aggregate and win a somewhat close but decisive decision.